Hello and welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovative leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss their perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. I'm your host, Kevin Feenan, and with me today is Botgirl Questi. Botgirl Questi describes herself as a beautiful thought experiment personified through the imagined perspective of a self-aware avatar. Her blog, www.botgirl.com, brings many of her thought experiments to the light using a combination of technical prowess and prose. Botgirl is now making her mark on Cloud Party, the browser-based virtual world, with the potential for serious transworld experiences. Botgirl, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you. And I need to update my resume, huh?
Yeah, kind of. That's okay. We don't stand on formality here. We make do with what we have. Good. Like everything else that happens in Second Life, right? I mean, you sort of go with what's sort of available.
Yeah, I thought the whole.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought the whole point of being here is you didn't need a resume.
Yeah, well, you don't need a resume. A couple of good bottles of Chianti or something will probably work very well.
That's a good point.
So you've been involved with everything in virtual worlds here. I mean, a lot of different things within virtual worlds over a number of years. And it's been really kind of neat. I mean, we've had you on the Virtual Worlds Best Practice in Education for the last 2 years running in terms of, one of the major keynote speakers and what have you. And one of the things that I noticed is that you have this flair for describing relationships, or this relationship between identity and the only way I can put it is the incongruency of circumstances. And I'm wondering, from I guess sort of from your perspective, I mean, what sort of drew you to this idea of looking at I guess the only way I could really put it is the preponderance of, how we find ourselves inside a virtual setting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I did not get into this with that intention, and I had thought very little, if any, about identity. So it just kind of, I think, when you pay attention to what's going on, which I think Second Life is very good for, especially in the beginning. Everything's new, everything's fresh, everything stands out. I just noticed that incongruency between, who I felt and knew myself to be and how people would respond. And because of the kind of hardcore immersionist pseudonymity that I took on for the first year or so, I adamantly refused to, admit that I was even human, let alone one gender or another. So people would be hitting on me and projecting all kinds of things upon the character they imagine, and it was just obvious that who I wasn't who they were thinking who they thought I was, or who they projected upon me. So that was really it. It was just something I noticed, and then one thing led to the other, and I kept looking into it and writing about it and playing around with it, and that's how it developed.
Right. Because I noticed through a lot of your blog postings, what have you. I mean, there's, you seem to have this flair for capturing a lot of those things. I mean, it's I guess how do I describe this? I mean, it's sort of like listening to George Carlin talk about, this idea of language and how we misuse language, right? And going through your blog posts and you being able to show people how we sort of misuse the idea of our own identity and how we're in some way sort of either not using it to the extent that maybe we could, or the absurdity of some of the things that we just get caught up in, Right. So I mean, one of the things that you mentioned as part of one of your blog posts is that, we tend to do the same things over and over again, and then year after year, usually without question. And even though within inside a virtual world, we have all these really neat tools that can sort of help us break out of that mold, we seem to keep getting drawn back into these common patterns of behavior.
Yeah, I think part of it is just the weight of habit. Uh, I'm fortunate enough to have attention deficit disorder, and my what I do for a living, my official title is geek interpreter. So what I do all day, a lot of days is kind of hear what people are saying and try to get down to the root of it and separate, what's real and what's imagined, and what are the key points that someone needs to get across to understand themselves and be understood. And I found what happens a lot of times is the reason we can't communicate well about a topic to others is we really don't see the core of it ourselves. So yeah, I tend to be very pithy just because I have really low attention. So I can barely read something on the web beyond two or three paragraphs, which is why that's what I usually end up with. So I think that by subtracting and keep whittling things down from what might be kind of large, vague concepts with a lot of details to the few essentials, you see what's bullshit. You're forced to evaluate your thoughts, and a lot of times what I end up with at the end of a post, especially if I'm doing something visual, is a lot different than where I went into it. So it's really as much more discovery than anything else. I mean, I'm constantly surprised by what comes out the other end.
Right. I mean, have there been certain things that have surprised you more than others as you've observed other people and how they approach this, the, different circumstances in terms of, what's real to them versus what's imagined within inside a virtual context?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not a gamer. I've never played games. I'm not really a role player, believe it or not. And since I have a real life relationship, and I have no interest in that end of it, I don't have any real pull towards playing that fantasy game. So I was, especially in the first 6 or 8 months, just amazed at I keep telling people, you don't I'm not who you see. There is no Botgirl. You don't know what age, what gender, you know nothing about me. So stop, you know, why are you saying this stuff? And it's just like a drug or a fairy tale. Um, I think it's very intriguing for some people, and I personally don't understand the pull to do that just because I haven't experienced. Because there's always a part of me that won't shut up that says this isn't real. This isn't. There's part of this that I'm not seeing, and I can't release myself into the experience. Like I guess like you do in a movie, that utter suspension of disbelief. So I think for most people it's intentional. It's not delusional, and I think it's relatively harmless in most circumstances.
But yet you're here, and for virtual world's best practice in education. I mean, you've certainly been an outstanding keynote during those particular sessions. A number of other different occasions where people have asked you to come in and talk. So obviously there's something about this which is a bit more than that.
Well, the flip side of it is we're largely fantasy to begin with. So whether it's in our day-to-day life, a lot of what we conceive ourselves to be is a hodgepodge of attributes that we put together that we label. We're very different in different scenarios. If you at home with your kids, you're different than you might be out at a club, and probably very dramatic differences depending upon the external circumstances. So everything I just said about virtual worlds applies equally to the physical world. It's just harder to see it. it's harder to see that, we're talking to someone and 95% of what we experience with this other person is projection. And that's even true in our with our closest relationships. I think I might have told the story before, but it's a good one. A couple weeks after I met the person who's now my wife, we had our first argument, and I don't remember what the argument was about. But at some point, I said, "You always say that," and she looked at me and she said, "I don't always say anything. I've only known you for 2 weeks." And I think that's the kind of I obviously had some kind of baggage from somewhere that I was projecting upon her. So, I don't see like a hardcore difference between the way this projection works in a virtual world and in the physical world. It's just a lot easier to see in the virtual world.
So, in I guess from my perspective, then it's kind of interesting because I mean we do certainly get people with inside Second Life, and this, to a large extent, has become their first life, right? I mean they don't make a separation between what is what is real and what's imagined. To them, coming in here, this is all real. So, how do you, is there anything special that you use to keep all of this stuff separated? Because sorry, let me backtrack on that just a slight bit, because I mean it's kind of interesting. It's what you were just talking about was something that I noticed time and time again, is that as you tend to meet people, you're part of a specific social circle for that particular individual, and either the way they approach you tends to very much be a function of how you fit into that slice of who that individual is, right? So as you said, you don't necessarily tend to see the entire individual, but one of the things that I've noticed tends to happen with this environment is people who get completely immersed into this tend to find it an extremely intimate experience, and then the next thing you know, they're completely opening up in terms of everything, in terms of who they are.
Yeah, I think that's related to there's something called limerence, which is a term about the feeling of romantic love, having a crush on someone. And I think that's very common that, you meet somebody just, in virtual or physical life, and you feel this connection, and all of a sudden you're opening up, you're feeling things that you've never felt before, you feel like a different person around them. And there's actually some kind of biochemical process at play where your oxytocin and other hormones are kicking in that actually changes the way that you perceive. So my suspicion is that the experience that you have in the virtual setting is just the same thing happening, although you're not physically present with the other person. I don't think the experience is, if you have somebody hooked up to a brain scanner and you do the blood samples and look at what chemicals were going out, I don't think there'd be much, or if any, difference. And it's a very attractive and appealing state to be in. I mean, being in love is great, that crush feeling. And I guess when you're physically present with someone all the time, it's hard to avoid the reality bumping in. But if you're with someone in a virtual setting, especially if you're spending maybe a couple hours at a time, it's easier to be on your good behavior and to avoid some of the conflicts that might pop up, at least for a time.
So do you find that most people are on their best behavior while they're in here then?
I don't know if best behavior is the right word.
Good behavior?
But it's easier. It's easier to and that's not really true because people freak out and have all kinds of drama in world. So I think maybe you're postponing the inevitable when the I I believe that the one reason you're attracted to another person initially is that there's some kind of psychological unhealed trauma that you're trying to fix through the relationship with this new person. And it's like nature's way to get you in a situation to work through that, and I think that's why people have relationships, and then all of a sudden somebody changes, and it's like, who is this person? Well, they just worked through this attraction point, and then now the trauma's popping up. No, this, your issue with your mom or your dad, um, all of a sudden those old feelings start kicking up, and the and that's how you get this huge dramatic shift. And that's both. Again, I really don't think it's any different in virtual and physical worlds. It's just more obvious in the virtual world that there's not a lot of real-time substance to it, as far as the extreme negative emotion that pops up.
Right. So, I mean, does that help us in any way? Because I guess to some extent, I guess it depends on where you're coming from. But certainly as one of the things I was interested in, coming in here was the educational aspects of what's in here, and what are the lessons that we can learn, and more specifically, what can we take from here and take back into the quote unquote real world. And I'm just wondering whether or not, because it almost sounds to a certain extent as if you're sort of saying, well, it just sort of, it is what it is, and there's really nothing more than that to it. Or is there something that we can actually take from this, or that we should be taking from this and bringing back into other things that we get out of this experience, or that we should be getting out of our opportunities within here?
Well, I was a lot more optimistic about it in my first year and a half, as far as the positive potential of experience in virtual worlds to transform the way we see physical life. My hope was that when you realize that a lot of the negativity that you're experiencing emotionally, and a lot of the projection is actually manufactured, and you can separate that in the virtual setting, that you can go back into the rest of your existence and make those same connections, and start whittling away at that sort of illusion. But very few people I talk to have made that step. I think what often happens is you end up having a virtual life, and you end up suffering in two lives instead of just one. However, yeah, again, I have no sense. Second Life is such a big place. I've met just a fraction of the percentage of people that hang out here and spend a lot of time. So I really have no sense, percentages wise, of how people are using it, or what kind of positive or negative impact it's having on their life outside of Second Life. My sense, just from the people I've met, is that it's not huge as far as the impact.
In terms of what people are taking away, what about the people that you're running into, though? I mean, are these the how do I put this one? Obviously there's something in here that's sort of keeping you here. So, I mean, is the type of person that you're meeting in here actually better or worse, or?
Well, I'm not really I'm pretty introverted, and I would say 99% of what I do related to virtual worlds now is just as a creative platform. Most of the people that I interact with that have avatar identities actually through social networks. So the social side, I was usually more of an observer, not in all cases, but for the most part. And since I gave up complete pseudonymity, I backed off even more from social interaction in that way within the virtual world. I would say creatively, I think I know quite a few people that have, including myself, who have taken the creative energy that was stimulated within the virtual world and gone outside of it, either through on the internet or not.
Yeah, I mean, you describe this concept that in your blog postings that you call atomic world art. and some of the different things that you've been starting to get into of late with inside those creative areas. Could you describe for me a little bit in terms of what atomic world art sort of means to you and how it applies to the artistic projects that you're working on right at the moment?
Atomic World is something that I have to deal with gravity to create. So if I'm at my computer and creating strictly in Photoshop or in Second Life or some other digital means, it's easy. You can undo if you make a mistake. Things don't fall down if you push them over. Working with atomic world or physical world materials, it's a lot different. I mean, there's a definite attraction for me, which is why I'm doing it, because it's uh, I guess because it's different and I enjoy it, but it's a lot more difficult to me.
So how are you finding some of the difficulties? Because I know you were talking a little bit on some of your blog posts in terms of this idea of using new tools and platforms and using, iPods and what have you. How are you finding that those are influencing what you're doing with inside this environment? Short of switching heads on Barbie dolls type of thing. Which I like the
Yeah.
picture, by the way. The picture was kind of cool.
Oh, with Ronald McDonald.
Ronald McDonald and the leather chick or whatever it was.
Yeah, my kids love that one. Um, uh, what was the question again? I
Oh,
think I love mobile. I like working in constrained spaces, and not only spaces, but I have a decent laptop with Photoshop and all kinds of tools on it. But I find myself drawn to working with on a phone or on a tablet, even though it's much more constrained. And I'm there are a couple types of people that do artistic work. One sort has a vision in their mind, and then they realize that vision through tools. The other sort, which I am one of, it's more of a dialogue with the tool. So when I start working with a new tool, it's like collaborating with a new partner. And so that's what I like about mobile. Also, that it's very fast. I usually I like projects that I can finish in an hour or two, and mobile's great for that. Even videos, I can slam together in a couple of hours. So I've used, for example, I use an iPhone to photograph the screen of Second Life instead of using a desktop tool to render down, mostly because it's fast and it's kind of fun to do the camera moves with the hand, and then those can be edited instantly on the tablet very rapidly. And 4 hours later, I have a video posted. So it's kind of an addictive rush.
just to be able to get something creative out that quickly.
Yeah, there's what I like, what I really enjoy about, I guess, the last 4 or 5 years of technology is that the barriers between, uh, thinking of an idea and actually being able to create something and share it, uh, there's almost no friction anymore.
The you were talking a little bit about this idea of constrained spaces, but yet, when you're working within an environment like Second Life, when you add this into everything else, to a certain extent, doesn't this give you too much space?
Um, yeah,
Like
I I guess I don't feel that way from a creative standpoint. I do certainly from figuring out what to do. I mean, there's just so many options, and part of it's the problem with search, just figuring out uh, out of the 10,000 things going on, what to do. And since that kind of brings up another interesting topic, is that Second Life is or virtual worlds, 3D virtual worlds in general, are very different than the rest of net-enabled technology, and that everywhere else you're going to uh, rapidly moving from place to place, having multiple screens going at one time, moving from Twitter on your phone to something on your computer. People are now watching TV with a second screen in their hand. And Second Life it's like the physical world. It's real time. If I want to try 20 different places on the web, I can click 20 times, and 5 minutes later, I'm through it all. In Second Life, teleporting from place to place is a much more friction-filled experience. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's very different.
Hmm. Okay. The you when you're looking at these barriers, this idea of barriers between ideas and the idea that the technology is now sort of enabling us to go from concept to finished product to I guess to a certain extent to a dialogue with those people that you're working with. We had Doug Thompson on here a while ago that was talking about this idea about the internet is enabling us to sell little dreams in this concept. Do you find that the the ability to offer up these ideas is actually where do I sort of want to go with this? There's two concepts I really sort of want to get at here. One is this idea of you know the internet being this platform, and we have these virtual tools and mobile tools, and we're going to have cloud tools, and eventually we'll have, I don't know, holographic tools. I don't know, we'll get more and more tools as we go along. But the more access we get, the more isolated I always seem to feel, I guess, to a certain extent. So it is this idea that we can bring these ideas, is this really I guess, sort of reaching people, or is it more an internal satisfaction type of thing?
Uh, what do you mean by feeling more isolated?
Well, the if you look at the early days of the internet and the key pioneers that were saying, "Hey, guess what? I can now publish, and I can compete head to head with the Wall Street Journal." In the early days of the internet, yeah, you could, but now everybody is self-publishing. So, you know, that whole opportunity that was available seemed to have come and gone. It was sort of, when you have 4 billion voices that are all trying to do the same thing, right? Do we not in effect lose ourselves and become more anonymous than we were before? And what I'm wondering about is, with some of these tools and some of these techniques to bring ideas to a marketplace, are we not in essence, is this really sort of making us more in tune and more with touch with the communities that we're involved with, or is this making us more isolated?
Uh, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of it is just perception. So I like the YouTube generation, even though it's 95% crap. From the point of view of the creator, I believe it gives people the ability to uh, be introspective, to pay attention to what they're seeing, thinking, and feeling, and in communicating that in a tangible way, I believe there's a huge individual benefit. Now, if you publish a bunch of videos and you get zero comments and zero views, I can see how that would make you feel isolated. However, it only really takes a few people's feedback to provide a sense of satisfaction. Like even on Twitter, when I pay attention to how many people I'm actually going back and forth with, it's maybe a dozen or two at the most. So although there's a sense that there's this huge Twitter audience, however many followers there are, it's really just a very small circle of people going back and forth. The same thing with blogs. There's a handful of blogs that I follow a lot and comment on frequently, and there's not a lot of people. But so I guess what I'm getting at is it really doesn't take a huge number of people. I think if you find a handful of like-minded people that appreciate each other's work, I think that's a huge win. And you'd probably have a hard time finding that or a lot of people would, in physical circles, physical world circles, especially as you get older, once you get out of school. And, it's harder to find people of like interests. It takes a lot more work and energy.
Hmm. Yeah. The another concept that you were talking about on your blog site is this idea of storytelling, right? And how you find that that's a very, and I guess this goes back to this idea of confined spaces, right? The you know where you're actually finding that's more liberating from a, I guess, from an artistic standpoint in sort of, with some of the things that crap's doing, what have you, where you've got to have to express an idea or a story in 100 words, and that's it. That's all you're limited to, right? Or being able to do a video in 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's very. I think it's very empowering. I work with experts and professionals a lot who can whip off a 5,000 word paper or a 100 bullet point presentation with no problem. But you try to you try to get them to write 3 paragraphs that communicate their main idea effectively to a non-expert, and many or most people are pretty clueless about how to do that. So I think it's a very uh, productive exercise, maybe even especially for uh, people with expertise in a particular area, to try to whittle that down to that small story. Again, as you whittle things away and you throw away things that are superfluous, you eventually see if there's substance at the core of your idea. And I guess secondarily, it's a lot of fun. I love Crap Mariner's 100 word stories. It's I don't know if people are familiar with it, but basically he comes up with a topic once a week, like a word usually, and he invites people to write 100 word stories and send in a text and audio, and then he has a weekly podcast. But that's a lot of fun and a great exercise.
Yeah. So, I mean, do these particular environments, I mean, are you finding that more and more people, because I mean, this is sort of like the Twitter mentality, right? How quickly can you express something in 148 characters? Now we've got, these particular types of things, or, there's opportunities to get involved with these small ideas, small confined spaces. But yet, a lot of other social media, allow us to sort of ramble on, right? Are we gaining anything from those opportunities, or is this still confined to a very small, or, well, large? I don't really know the size, but is this confined to a specific population who just sort of finds that particular type of thing enticing?
I don't know. I mean, how many people use any aspect of life in a very productive way? I sure don't in most areas. So I would say that there is the potential to experience types of those benefits, and it's pretty easy if you're introduced to it to try it, as opposed to a lot of other things where there might be a longer learning curve. It's also a lot lower risk. You're investing 140 characters. It's not a big deal if it flops. If you have one good one out of 50, I think you're doing pretty well. Other than the late great Second Lie, who is no longer with us.
How complex do you find that you can actually um, make a point in that few, those few couple of minutes or those few couple of words? And I guess where I'm sort of going with that question is, quite often, we talk about things being black and white, but a lot of things in that we deal with, political ideas, social ideas, sort of the larger, broader type of things that have people really need to have a good grounding of in order to make proper decisions about. Sometimes these require more. These require a more in-depth understanding. How complex can you make a 3-minute video in terms of trying to get down to a concept that might influence the way somebody votes, or influences what they're doing about the environment, or how they're treating animal rights, or whatever type of what's the word that I'm looking for? I mean, the these different types of causes that people are out there sort of fighting for.
I don't necessarily believe that nuanced, rational discourse has a lot of impact on any of those things that you just talked about. I think that advertising has shown that persuading people to act is can be accomplished very well in 90 second, 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute, uh, well put together uh, video, audio, or ads, so to speak. Now, and I don't think that's the most desirable way to frame public discourse, but that's the reality. So if you do want to affect change, a lot of it is rallying your own people behind the change. And again, I don't know if nuanced argument is necessarily the best way. Thing is, this isn't either or, like you said. It's not black and white. This is one tool you have in your box, and it's a new and shiny tool. So that's why I like it so much.
New and shiny is always good. Because I guess as you're talking about it, and Bevan introduced me to the 100-word essays, and I gave it a shot, and my pathetic little contribution was submitted last week. But
That was quite a philosophical treatise.
It was, yeah, just it was interesting trying to cram all that down into 100 words. But the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm thinking, it'd be kind of interesting to have maybe a little bit of a similar type of a thing, a little bit of a competition to say, how within 100 words, how big a subject can you actually tackle, right? How complex a subject can you actually take on and still make a a point that has some scientific or rational basis behind it, right? As opposed to the way the news tends to work, where you've got the 10-second soundbite and everybody bases their opinions either off of that or what Jon Stewart happens to be broadcasting on the Daily Show.
Well, the validity of a short, pithy, 100-word story or short video has nothing to do with its length. And I think what's rare is to find people who generally are open-minded and confident or not fearful enough to have a dialogue in the mutual pursuit of greater understanding, rather than simply trying to persuade someone else to their point of view or defend your point of view. A lot of times when someone else talks, especially in a controversial or emotionally charged topic, is thinking about what you're going to say next or listening for things that someone says that can refute. I think it's relatively rare in those circumstances that someone's actually trying to understand what the hell somebody else is saying and trying to find the value in it. I think a good exercise is in the contentious situations, to see if you can make a good argument from the other point of view. That's just basic debate. So again, I don't know how this plays into the short, pithy statement, but the good thing about something brief is at least you've constrained the area of discussion. A lot of times in contentious dialogues, I'll give you 500 great words with a great line of reasoning, but when you respond, you won't even respond to what my chain of logic was necessarily. So if you narrow the discussion down to a very small piece, also if you can, whiteboarding's even better for this. I think you have more of an opportunity to see if you're disagreeing about the same thing, and at least understand what your actual areas of disagreement are, rather than just coming out, which I see a lot, is just what's from left field with some other argument.
Yeah, I guess as you're talking about that, I get one of the things that I sometimes find, though, is that if you constrain a topic too much, then you get into this problem, death by a thousand cuts, right? Is that you can tear apart individual sections of something so much to the point where people miss the fact that the slippery slope argument is in fact the correct argument to be making. And certainly I've seen that in my consulting career. I've seen that many times where people have taken a very complex subject, they've tried to break it down into so many different parts, and they've argued each of those parts away. But when it comes to actually having solved the problem, that was the exact wrong thing to have been doing, right? They needed to look at it from a holistic standpoint. So, is there room for both?
Yeah, of course there is. And I'm not talking about arguing because I've been in so many meetings where you get a room full of people with a document and people are arguing every word or every 5 words.
Yeah,
I hate that. But what I'm talking about is what you're talking about is the first paragraph in an executive summary.
yeah.
So the discussion isn't about these micro details that nobody cares about except the people that are arguing. But what's the basic story? What's our basic narrative? And let's see where we agree or disagree on that. And that's the way I write. If I'm writing something that takes 5 hours, a lot of times it'll take me 3 hours to write the first paragraph. And I find that if we can limit discussion to the high level first, it helps down the road instead of what often happens is endlessly quibbling about each detail.
So in this size doesn't matter, I guess, so to speak.
Well, that's my opinion.
Oh, okay. The when Bevan was talking to you, a little bit earlier on, I guess this idea of appreciating the courage of my lack of conviction. For somebody who has a lack of conviction, you sure seem to be showing the opposite.
I don't know. Well, first that line was just kind of a funny tweet, but it came from a realization I had that it doesn't take a lot of courage if you have strong convictions. I mean, if you're a true believer, kind of not necessarily a fundamentalist mindset, but if you're dead certain about something, then it doesn't take a lot of courage to go out into the gauntlet because nothing that anyone could say is going to change your mind. However, on the opposite side is if you're not really attached to your opinion being forever true and accurate, then it's also a type of courage because if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I've been wrong a million times before, and I'll be wrong a million times again. So that's a different type of courage.
To be able to challenge your own convictions, I'm assuming then.
Well, either challenge them or be open to being persuaded otherwise.
So I was about to say how's especially within, and this will be interesting because now that I know that you're coming from a similar business context that I am, the how's that different from being able to go into a management meeting and then being accused of being a yellow-backed
flip-flopper?
Yeah.
I guess it depends what the organizational culture is like. So in certain organizational cultures are very political, and I, as a consultant, I am swimming in those waters to some degree, and it is very difficult because there's a lot of risk to stand out, to take a risk, and if you do step to the edge, there's no way you're going to admit that you took the wrong step because but that's the culture of the organization. I think that's part of the United States culture to some degree, at least. I mean, the flip-flop line, words I'm being, my God, he changed his mind. I think with Steve Colbert did a roast of President Bush, and he said, the good thing about President Bush is that what he believes on Monday, he's going to believe on Wednesday, no matter what happens on Tuesday. And I think that's pretty common.
Right. That's yeah. I've been in situations where it's to, how do I put it? I mean, to show the courage of the lack of conviction is to show weakness, right? And it's sort of like, really, it's right, because I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I think to a large extent, I think people need to be able to, um, how do I want to put this? But I mean, they need to be able to be in a position where they can change their minds as circumstances change. Whereas if you stick to a particular avenue, come hell or high water, right? Regardless of the sharks nibbling at your, you know, cojones or whatever, depending on how far they've worked their way up, right? And still saying, no, 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 there's no sharks down there, really. Yeah, Grub saying the sharks don't nibble. Yeah.
Well, I think the conviction, what makes sense is to have conviction about your ethics and core principles. And then as different situations occur, you'll have to make judgments about how those core ethics and principles play out in a certain situation. So I think that's where you get room, philosophically, to change your mind about things, and not be a weed blown in the wind. It just, it's almost like scientific uh, theory. I have this belief, and I'm going to test my belief against some kind of reality. And if it's confirmed, I'll take another step forward. If not, well, I'll have to admit that I missed something.
Does this environment, like the one that we're in, or through the various different artistic projects that you've been working on, does this actually really help that in any constructive way, or is that really a matter of a conscious will to say, I want to get something like that out of this environment? Right? Are we essentially learning from this in any way that sort of supports our, those types of things, or is it just something that's just there?
I don't know. I would say on a personal level, I apply things that I've learned or have initially thought about within a virtual world, outside the virtual world, all the time, almost every day. Certainly in kind of the creative end, doing video and images and comics and all that. There's a lot of free play between them. Uh, and then I also have a hard time personally separating now what is the benefit of the virtual world versus the social interaction, social sharing, and just thought process around it. So I'm not even in the virtual world that much anymore. Uh, certainly not more than a couple hours a week. But but that initial experience informs just about everything else that I do. My physical world, like even the dial photography, I can see how that stemmed directly from working in the virtual world with avatars. It's just an extension. I think that it's very good to allow yourself to experience different dimensions of yourself. At the same time, I think it's usually beneficial to integrate at some point, because if you're not integrating, uh, well, I don't even know what the downside is, but it seems to me that it's you might as well try to integrate the benefits of different domains and apply them in other places. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah. So is this something that you see as being, we tell kids, oh, we're going to take you camping, right? Don't mind the bugs and the mosquitoes and everything else. This builds character, right? Is this virtual worlds, these frontiers that we're dealing with, does this build character in such a way that people should, sort of be looking at this in a very practical sense in terms of making an effort to come into an environment like this?
If you'd asked me 4 years ago, I would have said yes. At this point, I would say probably not. I know very few. I have teenage kids, and neither of them have any interest in virtual worlds. I mean, one of them does gaming, plays WoW, and spends a lot of time with his friends, in a virtual gaming environment. Now, I would say I believe that helps you learn how to collaborate. It teaches you how to maybe hold your image of your physical self a little less tightly. I know that as far as like cross-gender characters in gaming environments are no big deal anymore. So I think that's a big plus. However, I don't think, if I was a gambling person, I don't think there was a high probability that just because someone goes into a virtual world, they're going to end up as a better, higher functioning person because of it. I think like anything else, either you're lucky, which I think I was lucky to begin with, or secondly, you have some kind of conscious intent. So I think it has the potential to do what you said, but whether you realize it or not, if you're not trying, I don't think it's necessarily likely.
Right. So, I mean, if we look at comparisons of things like Second Life to this other project that you've been working on, Cloud Party, how did, I guess from that perspective, there's not too much of a difference, I take it.
I don't think from that perspective, what's really got me hooked on Cloud Party is the feeling of being able to go into it instantly from a web click. I've been open about my Second Life use for 3.5 years, and I have hardly ever been able to convince anyone to go through the brain damage of registering and downloading the client and logging in. And then once you get there, like you said, it's so huge, trying to make some sense of it. With Cloud Party, there's been dozens of people that I just sit down with at work. Plus, it goes through the firewall, which is another big issue. And people think it's really cool. People that never use virtual worlds. So I just love, again, it's that whole friction thing. We're used to being able to, I want to do something. I want to hit something on the net. I take out my phone any day of the week, any hour of the night, and I'm there. And with Cloud Party, at least on a laptop, if you're using Chrome, I guess you've been having some Firefox issues.
Well, a couple.
So what you do in the world, I don't think it's going to necessarily be much different than Second Life. It's in very early beta, so there's not a lot there right now. But I just get this feeling that it's more in tune with the direction of everything else. This complete integration and immersion in a networked social media environment, except now we're adding the virtual world into something that's just a click away. Anytime you want to be there, boom, you're there. You want to have 5 people come in, no matter if they've ever used it before. A minute later, they're standing in the world with you, and I think that has very powerful potential.
So, what are some of the projects that you're doing within Cloud Party right at the moment?
I'm messing around. I have a I have a $15 a month island, and I threw up pixels and plastic art exhibit. It's renditions of my mostly doll and action figure art, just kind of arrayed within the island. So that's my little project right now. I'm hoping to do a visual storytelling exhibit in a month or two, hopefully with some other contributors. And then I've just popped in. There's a public sandbox area that people are very friendly, and everybody's with their new shiny new platforms playing around, and it's just kind of a relaxed and fun environment, and it's very small scale, which I like at the moment as well.
So the in beta then, I guess, when was this launched? Just in the last 6 months or January, I think?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And then I guess New World Notes had a post about it, which I think attracted a lot of Second Life people into it. And I would say probably at least half of the people I bump into are people, probably I would, as a matter of fact, it's probably 80% people who I've known about in Second Life or who come from Second Life. A lot of content creators are checking it out. I just saw IBM threw up an island on the commercial side, but it's I think it's mostly just hobbyists right now until they get the marketplace up. They're changing a lot of things. They haven't settled on their avatar rig. I just noticed that the way they handle scripts just changed. We're used to uh, now they have a separate script object. So investment you make right now in creating content for Cloud Party is a little risky unless you're just doing it for learning and fun because things are still very fluid and changing. But it's a lot of fun, and one downside is you have to authenticate through Facebook in order to build, and that's just because it was the easiest thing for them to do during the beta. But my understanding is they're going to allow authentication outside of Facebook down the road, and then you can also go in anonymously. Although I don't think you have the building tools with the anonymous login.
Right, right. So how do you feel that this is? Because I mean, obviously, I've seen a couple of your recent videos in terms of your, the recent position on Linden Labs, and some of
I presume
some of
in lab incredulity.
yeah, that's probably a very politically correct way of putting it. But I mean, as we start to look at how the virtual landscape is changing, how do you find that, or what do you feel is going to be some of the results of, some of these new competitors like, Cloud Party coming to the marketplace?
Well, I can't read Linden Lab mind. I guess Linden Lab doesn't have a mind. This is an organization. But I would say in the marketplace in general, I would think that it's going to bring in innovation. It's going to increase competition. And I think it's Cloud Party especially, I think once they're up and running, going to pull in new people into virtual worlds who have never been there before. So I don't know what the platform is going to look like a year or two from now. Maybe it's never going to mature to the point where Second Life is. I believe that it might actually benefit Second Life and that people might try Cloud Party and get because it's in such an early stage, they might decide, well, let's try out something a little bit more full blown and go to Second Life. I'm still, I wouldn't even, I'm not even confident that 5 years from now that most people are going to be using virtual worlds on a regular basis. I just don't know. I expect a lot more penetration, since in the 4 or 5 years I've been involved in it. And it's just people just aren't that excited. I think companies are continually looking for ways to save money and to collaborate. And I think that market may eventually cross over into virtual worlds. I don't know. I have no clue. I think gaming, multiplayer gaming is obviously huge. I think the mobile platform is starting to become reasonable as a multi-user collaborative platform. So I think that's going to be very interesting as well. And then, who knows what? I think technology is going to end up driving a lot of this. I mean, Google's coming out with their crazy speed internet in Kansas City. I've seen projectors that fit on the back of your phone, so you can project a 60-inch screen, from your little phone. So there's really no telling, but it's a very exciting time, and things are moving pretty rapidly.
Yeah. You had mentioned in one of your blog posts that Second Life has too much technical debt to move into the future.
Well, that's my guess. I mean,
well, I guess technical debt from which standpoint? Because I mean, there's lots of different ways that could sort of be defined. So,
well, I work with a software company. We're consultants, but we build software. So technical debt is basically as you create software, there's a certain amount of kludge that is within your code. Now, if you're doing something called test-driven development and refactoring, then you're constantly tweaking your code as it's created, and you can avoid some of the technical debt. But in most cases, that doesn't happen. So over the years, you accumulate kind of a mess in a code base, to the point where it's sometimes easier to throw something out and build from scratch rather than trying to fix something that's broken. I read something about Microsoft trying to uh, you know, fix some of their big products, and I forgot how many lines of code, but it was just a mind-boggling amount of code. And then I don't know about the architecture of Second Life. Again, I can talk tech a little bit, but I don't have the actual technical chops. But I believe there might be architecture issues. I think Philip Rosedale was just quoted that if he had it to do all over again, he would have done Second Life platform in the cloud, which is what Cloud Party does on the Amazon servers. So you can, instead of investing in a bunch of hardware and having to maintain that hardware and update that hardware, you use Amazon's hardware and let them worry about all of that. So I think it makes a lot more fast ability to move a lot more responsively and be a lot more agile if you don't have that huge, both the software technical debt and then your legacy hardware that you have to worry about.
Right. Right. So let me ask you this, and then we're going to have to wrap up the broadcast portion here. And so I mean, this is the technical signature question here at this point. If you had a crystal ball, what do you think the impacts of virtual worlds will be on society 5 to 10 years in the future?
Limited, I would say. I think there's a lot more pervasive technological changes going on that eclipse virtual worlds. I think virtual worlds might have a huge effect in some niches. I think education could be very interesting. I think modeling and simulation has a lot of potential. But as far as society and culture as a whole, I think network mobility is going to have the really profound impact on the foreseeable future.
Cool. Excellent. Well, Botgirl, I mean, thank you very much. That's all the time we have available for the broadcast show today. I'd like to invite you to stick around for an after show wrap up if you feel comfortable in so doing. And it's been wonderful having you on the show.
Great. Thank you very much.
Great. So that's it from the Rockcliffe Rotunda. I would like to thank everyone for being with us today. Inside the Avatar Studio is produced by Bevan Whitfield and Rockcliffe University Consortium. Technical production by Robustus Hacks and Mal Burns in association with Metaverse TV. If you'd like to find out more about Inside the Avatar Studio, please check out our website at avatarstudio.info or subscribe to our Twitter feed or Facebook fan page at uRockcliffe.